Maria. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Perfect. It'll look. Here we go.
Just really quickly, Jenna, I'm noticing for me, when you turned on the live transcription, it didn't automatically show up. If that's the case for you as well, you can find that at the bottom of your screen. Click on the live transcript button. You can either view full transcript, or if you would prefer a subtitle, those are a couple of options. So sorry about that, Jenna, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Maria. Okay, so can somebody give me a thumbs up or verbally let me know that you can see the full screen of the PowerPoint right now?
We can see it, Jenna.
Great. Well, thank you for being here. For folks who are normally attending the Restorative Justice Forum, for folks who are coming for the webinar, we're here to talk to you about fostering a shared understanding of power consciousness as a foundational element of restorative practices.
Hey, so I am Sarah Silvis Bernstein. I use she, her, and I am a CCASA board member, but more importantly, in presenting this material, I come from a background of Title IX and student conduct. So for those of you who mentioned that in the chat, I feel you. About 8 years doing that work at Naropa University. And then I have a strong background in restorative justice that I have integrated both at the university level, but also have a partner in an organization now called Restorative Integration, where we are primarily focused on bringing power and equity consciousness and restorative practices training and facilitation to small groups of people wherever we are invited. So working with community co-housing groups, advocacy groups. We recently were hired to work with a community thrift store who wants to train their staff on restorative practices and how to be conflict positive. So my dream is that we can create pods of restorative communities out there as ways to transform our wider perception of power and equity.
Again, I'm Jenna, she, her. Many of you are going to be familiar with me from our calls. I am the Sexual Assault Response Program Manager, and I facilitate and organize our Restorative Justice Monthly calls. And I'm also going to be facilitating and organizing our Restorative Justice Project that we were awarded, which stick around until the end of the call, because I'm going to be telling you more about that project and how you can apply if you are interested in your community. At the end of this webinar, we're going to give you some information on that. So I want to take a look at where we're going to go today, and then we're going to take a look and review what we've done so far. So we're going to start by taking a look back. We always have to take a look at history and our recent history, because this is a part of a series. And we always have to look at the foundations of where we've come and what we've done to be able to know where we're going. So we're going to take a look at the lineage of restorative justice, not just within CCASA and the work that we've done, but in its history. We're also going to take a look at the expectations that we have for each other and for ourselves for today, the setup and the format of the webinar, and talk through some group agreements. And then the expectation is that we're going to work together in a circle practice. We're going to connect through that. We're going to also examine the social power within the right use of power framework. So Sarah's going to tell you all about that, and then how social power dynamics and restorative justice intersect. Sarah, do you have anything you want to add to that to set us up for today?
This sounds good.
Great. So there's so much to review. We've had one webinar so far in our series, and that was an opportunity for us to take a step back and take a look at where we've come from in this field, in the field of sexual violence, in the field of survivor and victim rights, in the field of the women's movement. and to examine existing systems, existing culture, the nonprofit structure, and everything associated with the work that we do, and the culture around that. That's going to be something that we threaded through all of the webinars, but we really wanted to start with that. If you haven't seen our first webinar, we do really recommend that you go on YouTube and you watch that when you get a chance after this webinar. And Sarah, just jump in if there's something you want to fill in as well.
No, that's good.
Okay. So we think that relationships need to come first. To be able to do restorative justice, we have to be able to focus on our relationship with ourselves and our relationships with others in connection. That's what this is all about. So we're going to spend a lot of time talking about that. It's something that we discussed last time, but we're going to spend a lot of time talking about that in relation to power today. We also, as a field, the field of sexual violence, need to be looking at comprehensively examining harm. I think oftentimes the work that we do can be siloed, whether it's people who are working with survivors, people who are working with people who caused harm, or what people might refer to as offenders. We need to be looking at the larger picture here when it comes to restorative justice. And then we also need to go slow. So I think many of us who have been working in this field feel like there's not enough options for survivors, for healing, for justice, for accountability. And so we're quite anxious to start doing restorative justice. And we hear that and we feel that too. And at the same time, it's really important for us to go slow so that we can maintain the integrity of the roots of restorative justice, so that it's not just about the community group conference. It's about the undergirdings. We're really bringing the foundations and the roots up into the practice that we do on a daily basis, as well as when we're working with survivors, people who experience sexual harm and people who cause sexual harm. Anything to add, Sarah?
I just really want to say how much I appreciate the review of the importance of going slow. I do believe through experience and through looking at the research that restorative practices and restorative justice, hence repair, moves at the speed of trust. And often trust and trust building can be slow. It takes time. If I think about the people that I really trust in my life and the process that it took to get there, it really didn't happen upon first meeting or second meeting or third. So I like to remind myself of that when I am facilitating or I'm working with communities, or I myself am in a situation where I'm working towards repair, that from a restorative lens, things move at the speed of trust.
Thank you. And I did just want to highlight that Maria did put the YouTube link into the chat if you want to bring that up and save it for later.
Great. So what we're going to talk about today is kind of one of my favorite things to talk about. We're going to be talking about power and equity consciousness and how that really fits in as a baseline and a proactive measure within a larger framework of restorative practices that is essential to do reparative work like restorative justice. So briefly, if we look at this triangle, this is a triangle that was created by my partner and I with restorative integration. And what we created here is a restorative practices pyramid, in a sense, that shows us that repair is really just the tip of the iceberg when we think about bringing restorative perspectives into our communities. That first, we have to think about being self-aware, and we have to think about awareness of our own self-regulation, our own social locations, our own perceptions around power and equity. And also, we firmly believe in restorative integration that compassion and mindfulness are also essential components to beginning to do this kind of work in your communities. So when organizations want me to come in and talk about restorative justice, I always start at the speed of trust, and I start slowly by talking about, okay, before we get to talking about repair, we actually have to talk about what are we doing to get to the place where repair can be fostered. And so I believe that that comes really from this baseline of understanding what I call power and equity consciousness. So this is looking at social power dynamics through an anti-oppressive lens. So in this webinar, we'll continue to explore how to build and maintain relationships within a restorative community paradigm. And we're going to integrate a discussion and common understanding of power through a research and publish an adopted perspective of the right use of power approach, which I'll talk more about in a moment. So this work is really important because when we foster a power and equity consciousness and we develop a shared language for discussing power, we can, as a community here with these CCASA webinars, talk about things more with ease. When we can name power dynamics specifically, when we can name power differentials specifically, then we can do this work a lot quicker. And you'll understand what I mean as we learn a language and a framework for that language as we progress through this webinar. So, we really want to talk about today, how does power intersect with conflict and harm? How does power show up in attempts to repair harmful impacts? And so let's talk a little bit about the lineage of this work and head on over to the next slide. So if we take a look at this tree and the leaves, we can see that Jenna and I are coming to this conversation not as just Jenna and I, but as people that have learned and gained a lot of knowledge through other organizations, other people, other ways of thinking, other epistemologies. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the leaves that I'm bringing, and Jenna will talk about some that she's bringing as well. So I mentioned a moment ago that I am presenting a perspective on social power dynamics through the approach of what is called the right use of power. So there's the Right Use of Power Institute that's run by Cedar Barstow, and she's actually in Colorado. She lives in Boulder, but this is a program that she has developed, trained, and has been evidence-based research over many, many years of her life. And we'll be using that framework of the right use of power to understand what power is, defining power dynamics and dimensions of power, and also talking about roles and responsibilities when it comes to power, and then how that specifically relates to restorative communities. And so I really want to honor that this work has come through my training with Cedar Barstow and the Right Use of Power Institute, and also share with folks that I encourage you to check out their work as further resources. I mentioned before that I have a long history with Naropa University, and in that organization, a lot of my work with Amanda Aguilera, who's now my business partner with Restorative Integration, and Regina Smith has really helped expand the idea and the functionality of some of these power definitions, especially when we start to talk about status power and social locations. The work that Amanda and Regina have done have really influenced my perspective and how I share this work. And then finally, much of the images and some of the language you'll hear comes from the work that I do with Amanda and Restorative Integration. So I also want to make sure that I honor her and the expertise that she has bestowed and shared with me. Jenna, I'll hand it over to you to talk about some of your leaves.
Thanks. So in all that we do, the reason that we're going slow, the reason that we are talking about theory and foundation is because we really want to honor the indigenous roots of this practice. We don't want to culturally appropriate it. We do want to recognize that every community who's going to use restorative justice is going to use it in a little bit different way. And that's the way that we do things. That's going to be appropriate for its community. And we want to honor the roots of it. We want to honor the fact that restorative practices is something that we can do every single day within ourselves and within every relationship that we have. CCASA and the way that we've been exploring this work, because we want to acknowledge that this is not something that CCASA has been doing for many years. It's something that we are doing alongside our community partners. So we hosted a summit last December, and since February, we've been hosting monthly CCASA discussions, which many of you have attended, and we get to learn from each other and have this community interaction, which is something that we so value. And this feedback that we get from you, we're really integrating into the work that we do about how we are showing up when we're talking about restorative justice. So we want to talk a little bit about the format for today and what you can expect. This isn't going to be a lecture. There's going to be a lot of times where Sarah's going to share a lot of wisdom and things that she's learned. But we're also going to be doing a lot of practice of circles and sharing. So we want to set the stage for that. We want to let you know that that is something that we're going to ask of you, and that you will always follow what's right for you and set your own boundaries. So in that, we're going to be hosting breakout groups. They're going to be pretty small breakout groups. You set your boundaries on whether you have your video on right now, whether you have it on during your breakout group. If you choose to participate, you could choose not to go into those groups. The way you show up today is the right way to show up for you. And then once we come out of those breakout groups, we're definitely going to be doing some large group discussions to debrief what we talked about. So take care of yourself. We encourage you to participate, and it will help to understand what restorative justice can look like. At the same time, you do you today. You show up in the way that's right for you. So we always find that group agreements can be helpful when we have discussions, especially discussions on things that can be challenging. The first one is to keep an open mind. No one here knows everything. And so even if we've been taught life is some specific way, I think that restorative justice absolutely can challenge the punitive way of thinking that we have in the cultures in the US. So when we're challenging that, we can expect discomfort. Discomfort can be a healthy place. It can be a place for us to grow and learn from each other. And we do want to always discern between discomfort and hurt and trauma. So always take care of yourself and show up in the way that's right for you. Something that I really love and appreciate about restorative justice is that it admits the fact that we screw up as humans, that we both do harm and we both do good, and we're always capable of doing both. And that's why I like to talk about taking accountability, because there are going to be times in our life where we get hurt and where we cause harm. So when we do cause harm, what we're going to ask that we try and practice together is to take accountability. Even though it might not have been our intention, if we cause harm, that's the impact. The harm is the impact, so that we take accountability by apologizing and recognizing and trying to do better in the future. Another agreement that we have is confidentiality. We very much want you to share the information that is presented today that you discussed, but what we're asking for confidentiality around is the personal information that you might share with each other. We want to talk about participation levels and equity as well. This is going to be an interactive webinar. So within your small groups and within the large group, we would love to hear different voices from the folks who are participating currently. And so some people are more chatty, some people are less chatty, normally introverts, extroverts, however that might fall. We would love for us sometimes to let space hang, have some silence. Silence can be healthy, it can help us to process. And so sometimes those of us who are more chatty need to take a step back and leave room for other folks to speak. And we also want to take a look at equity, because we're going to be talking a lot about power identities, and a lot of the identities that we hold have privilege. And so the more privilege we have, the more we're used to talking up and being accepted, and we want to leave more space. The more privilege we have, the more of a step back we want to take. And then we also want to admit and recognize that not everyone of every identity is going to be present in this webinar. And we need to think about what are the identities and what are the experiences that are not being represented that we need to take into account. So those are the group agreements that we have to present to you. If there are any that you would like to add, anything that you have questions about, we encourage that. Please go ahead, raise your hand, unmute yourself, or use the chat. And you can always use the chat to everybody, or you can use the chat directly to me, directly to Sarah, or directly to Maria.
And as folks might be typing things into the chat box, I just want to add that I really appreciate that we are taking the time. I watch myself be like, oh my gosh, we've taken 17 minutes to like set this webinar up and like what the heck, but then I remind myself to model what we do in restorative practices and restorative justice, we do have to move at a slower pace, and we do have to really set things up with intention. For those of you who are engaged in restorative justice already, you know the importance of slowing things down in pre-conferencing, of slowing things down in the actual facilitation of circles. And so really being intentional about moving at a pace where folks can be oriented to the process is essential. So everything we're doing in this webinar is intentional as an experiential of what we hope to be mirrored in actual restorative practices and justice processes. I don't see anything else in the chat, Jenna. I think we can move forward.
Great. Also, take care of yourself. Always, always. Whatever that means to you, breathing, drinking lots of water, having your snacks ready, taking a break, whatever you need.
So as Jenna and I slightly touched on at the beginning of the webinar, and when you saw that restorative integration pyramid, I want to just refresh our memory for those of you who were on the webinar last time, and maybe some new information for folks that are joining us this time, is that restorative justice does not happen in a vacuum. Rather, I like to think of it happening in that pyramid, that it happens when we spend time not only in reactive responsivity with repair, but also when we engage in proactive measures of connection, responsive measures of maintaining relationships. And when we can do those building and maintaining practices in our communities, when it comes time for repair at the top of the triangle, we have the resilience and community well-being to engage skillfully in areas of conflict. So one of the really great practices for both building and maintaining relationships within restorative communities can be connection circles. And so we're actually going to practice that right now as a way for us to begin interacting and deepening into some of our relationships. So to practice a connection circle, we're going to be breaking you up into small groups, and you'll be sharing in rounds. I'd like you to, before you begin sharing, establish an order for sharing and maintain that order for all rounds. Practice holding space for the person sharing and really avoiding crosstalk. And please, as Jenna was talking about in the group agreements, manage your available time with awareness for how much or how little time you might be taking up with sharing. So let's go to the next slide and talk about what this connection circle rounds will look like. So in the first round, which Maria has put this text into the chat, the first round, please share your name and optionally anything else you'd like to share about your identity, such as your pronouns or something else. What brings you to this call? And then to really get into the meat here, share, what do you know about power? What do you know about power? Then you'll go in a second round, kind of in that same order, and you'll share, what do you know about your power? And then a third round, what do you not know about your power or power in general? So we're going to be working on groups of 3, and you'll have about 10 minutes. And again, these prompts are in the chat. And so I'll have Maria start to put folks into those groups of three. Jenna and I won't be in groups, but we look forward to debriefing on your connection circles after 10 minutes.
And turning it back over to you, Jen and Sarah.
Thanks, Maria. So we would love to do a little bit of a debrief and hear about your conversations. Is there anyone who would like to share in the chat and or unmute themselves and talk about what they talked about and what their experience was like?
Sure, I'll step up because there was a long silence. So heaven knows that what do we do with a long silence? Can you hear me? It's Jenna, can you nod your head if you can hear me?
Yeah, thank you. I can
So
hear you.
for me, I found it quite interesting. I'm very new to this, this aspect. I mean, I've been involved with different aspects of sexual assault and torture, et cetera, but this is newer for me. The other two women that were on the small group with me, it's sort of what I expected, an openness, a sharing, an honesty, a transparency, a wondering. And so you for me, I immediately got a sense that if you're on this call, you probably already have done some thinking and pre-work or self-work on being receptive and open to what we're going to be talking about.
Thank you, Carol. How about, Lori wrote in the chat, love chatting with my group. Very important takeaway was the point that lack of choices reflects powerlessness despite systems that purport to create remedies. Thanks, Lori. All right, anyone else want to share? All right, well, Erica, please go ahead.
Hey, yeah, I was just sharing with my group that it was nice to just have some reflection in the day, just for the sake of it, as opposed to needing to get to an action item in that moment. And I just noticed that I am having a theme today where folks are wanting to drill into one aspect like power, and it's hard for me to isolate it because it's so interconnected to so many other factors like intention and access and goals, priorities, values, morals. So just as its raw state of power, I said it's something that we have as a force that maybe is a more neutral force than I think about it most of the time. And that my challenge with it is how to, I don't know if this is possible, but to align what I'm perceiving as my power and how I want to be perceived and what the power really is like in me to what people are receiving and perceiving in what they're perceiving as my power, and vice versa. So that was where I was at.
Thank you so much for sharing, Sarah.
Oh, Erica, it's really good to see you. And
Hey,
hi. And so much of what you said actually leads us into what we're going to talk about, but I think we had another share in the chat too. Jenna, do you see
Yes, I'm scrolling through them right now. There are quite a few.
Yeah.
appreciate the group and differences shared and versatility, brainstorm and bounce ideas off of each other. How a person can have certain power in certain spaces while lacking power in larger contexts. Each of us hold multiple identities, some of which hold power and some of which don't. This deep, fast group needed more time, always, and you will get more time. There's a need to distinguish between power and force. Yes, how much work I need to do better understanding my abilities to respond. Yeah, so those are just some of the highlights that I pulled from the chat.
Awesome. Okay, well, let's talk about social power dynamics. So let's head to the next slide and just begin with some basic terminology. And again, I'm using a framework from the Right Use of Power Institute. So that is where the origins of the terminology we're using today is. Of course, there are other frameworks for understanding. I have just found this framework to be especially helpful when applied to restorative practices and restorative justice. So power can be defined as most simply the ability to have an effect or an influence. It is what enables us to do things. So very similar to what Erica was saying, this kind of realization of the neutrality of power. So within this framework, looking at power as the ability to have an effect or influence. And influence is how we interact with others to make changes or to have an effect. And then when we're talking about the terminology of right use of power, it's the use of personal, role, and status power, which we will go into these in just a moment, to prevent, reduce, and repair harm, in addition to evolve relationships and promote sustainable well-being and resilience for all. Let's head over to the dimensions of power page. And then Maria is also going to put a handout into the chat box that can be helpful for you. So let's talk a bit about dimensions of power. So now that we've defined power, let's talk about personal power. When we're talking about personal power, I'm talking about the power that we are born with, and it is the individual capacity to have an effect or influence. We always have our personal power, whether we recognize it or not, or others recognize it or not. That doesn't mean that others can try to interfere with our personal power, or that others can use tactics or behaviors to interfere with our access to personal power. So I want to make sure that I also share that about personal power. Another dimension of power is role power, and this is power that is awarded, assigned, elected, or earned. And role power accompanies various positions that we might occupy, such as teacher, coach, supervisor, therapist, advocate. A couple important things to understand in relation to role power is that it is always in addition to personal power, and it should come and go as we enter and exit the role. And I'm sure we all have had experiences either with ourselves or with others where they may have role power in a certain environment and decide that they think they also carry that same power in a different environment. But that really isn't the case with role power. And when we talk about right use of power, we talk about being able to take off our role power when we're actually not in that role or in that environment. Similar to role power is status power. And again, this is in addition to personal power. However, status power is culturally conferred. Status power is generally designated by structural power, which establishes cultural norms. And status power can be based on a number of social identities, such as race, gender, religion, just as some examples. And then collective power refers to the expanded power that comes when we combine personal role and status with others to create a stronger influence or impact toward a common interest. Collective power can be used in a variety of interests depending on what the collective is trying to accomplish. So for example, the Black Lives Matter movement and the KKK are both representations of collective power. Finally, systemic power is the power that has widespread effects, which are established in institutions at multiple levels. Systemic power manifests in structural and implicit ways, such as rules, professional expectations, or norms, such as what is considered to be polite or friendly or professional dress. Those with both role and status power that create collective power usually get to determine how systemic power manifests. For this reason, status power and those who get role power tend to be the same kinds of people. That is, systemic power perpetuates itself, ensuring that systems benefit most those who create those systems. So you have a handout that primarily talks about personal role and status, and that is really what we're going to be focusing on as we move forward in this call, as those particularly pertain to interpersonal power dynamics. So let's talk about power dynamic. Let's head over onto the next slide. So when we look at power through an interpersonal lens, we start to see the power dynamics that are inherent in relationships. One of the most important concepts to understand about power is the power differential, and it can be the basis of many ethical violations or conflicts and contributes to a lot of difficulties in relationships. So the power differential inherently exists whenever there is a role or status power present. So to make it easier to talk about the power differential within the Right Use of Power Institute framework, we use the terms up power and down power to help define different positions present in the power differential. So this language can help us begin to shift power dynamics from being implicit to explicit, so we can talk about the impacts of power differentials. So taking a look kind of at this image, there's an old saying, with great power comes great responsibility. And there is a reason for this. Up power is associated with responsibility because in up power, that person has access to more resource and advantage that can easily and often is misused or abused from an up power position. So responsibility is the necessary component here when we're talking about the power differential. And what about down power? Down power is marked by vulnerability inherent in the position. Go to the next slide. I want to iterate that down power does not equal no power. So when we look at that dimensions of power handout, we can see that folks always have personal power, and personal power can also be enhanced by collective power, by folks calling on colleagues, advocacy agencies, using unions or HR departments to help amplify personal power. So looking at up power and down power and understanding that down power does not equal no power, it's critical to get us out of a dualistic perspective that some people have all the power all the time and other people have no power most of the time. This kind of thinking can create hopelessness or competition. So let's take a moment now, and Jenna is going to have us talk a little bit about these dimensions of power.
We're going to do a large group share. And the first question we're going to examine is, where in your life do you recognize that you are in a position of up power? So that might be in your status. So some of the examples, Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, that you gave in terms of status might have to do with your religion, or your race, or role, which could be like social worker, for example.
Yep, you're correct. And again, just if you look at your handout too, that gives some more information on defining status and role. But the thing about status that's really important is looking at culturally conferred norms and historical groups that are in power versus historical groups that are marginalized. And so I can kind of start off and answer just this first part of the question. For me, as I identify as a white person, I identify in a position of up power because of the culturally conferred power that comes with whiteness.
And then the second part of that question is, what do you know and or not know about your power in this position? So who would like to share either in the chat or by unmuting yourself, your thoughts in terms of the answer to this question for yourself? Where do you see positions of up power in yourself? What do you know or not know about your power in terms of that position?
Hi, my name is Victoria Benjamin.
This is
She, her,
Carolyn.
hers. Yeah, so I think one area of my life where I have a position of up power is in my socioeconomic status, right? So I currently in my adult life went to college. I was a non-traditional student, and so I attained a master's degree, and now I work at a university. My partner also works at university, right? So we own a home, we live in a suburban community, all of those kind of things. And so what's interesting about that is I think I'm learning about my power in class because I come from the working class. I spent all of my adult life in the working poor, right? So a single mother, public assistance, renting, living in low income communities, as did my partner. And he also experienced incarceration for a long time. So we're both kind of just like learning what this really means to have this position and to move forward. So it's really difficult, I think, to unlearn being poor, but there's significant ways that us being more privileged socioeconomically lends us to be able to support other people financially in some cases. And then I think it gives us the freedom to offer our time differently as far as volunteering and that kind of thing. So we're learning as we go. So yeah, I would say that's one area for me.
Thank you for sharing, Victoria. Yeah, and status and role can sometimes change too. So thank you for sharing that nuance. In the chat, I'm seeing race, class, attractiveness, formal education, access to people in power. I recognize the power, but sometimes I don't know if it gives me meaningful voice or just superficial access. Another share is I recognize how power in my role within the community and the people we serve, and I have the power to help or harm. So I think it's very important to understand one's power in their role and ensure they are using to help it. Thank you. So let's go ahead and move on to the second question. Where in your life do you recognize that you are in a position of down power in terms of status or role? And what do you know and or not know about your power in this position? So go ahead, take a moment, think about it. Erica, I see you unmuted yourself.
don't tell anybody, but I'm realizing that I'm more of the person. I make up that I'm the person with my ear to the ground in my role. I'm not the overseer. And so that is a power position, and I'm trying to figure out how to enunciate that power or accentuate that power so that it's most effective when technically there's someone above me, and how to be, I guess I would like to be graceful about it, balancing like the grace and wrecking ball energy.
Thank you for sharing. Anyone else like to share before we move on? Right. Let's keep moving forward, and we will definitely have more opportunities to share coming up.
Great. Thank you for those good discussions and recognition of how up and down power might show up for you and in your interpersonal relationships. Again, this is the very base of the foundation, understanding our own power and our own social locations. And when we do and don't have role power, up or down status power, it's all essential to how we actually show up as facilitators and community members in restorative justice and restorative practices spaces. And we'll talk more about that in just a moment. So let's head on over to the next slide with the 2 circles. There is another handout that Maria is sending over, and this is really just for you to have. We're not going to go through this today, but basically it's discussing role differences and responsibilities for folks that are in up power and down power, and how, again, down power doesn't mean no power. How can down power folks show up fully for the relationship? And that's what this slide is demonstrating here. So in the right use of power, there's a principle that we call the 150% principle. And this is a principle that is not static. It is really just a model to demonstrate that there is more responsibility on the person in up power to show up for the relationship. You can use whatever numbers you want. Amanda and I sometimes get pushback of, why is it 150% and not 125 or whatever? It's not about that. It's really just a demonstration. So in a relationship with a power differential, both people are responsible for fully utilizing their personal power for the health and betterment of the relationship. However, the person who is in up power, so up role or up status, has an extra responsibility for the health of the relationship because of their up power position. So we say that the person in up power is 150% responsible for the health of the relationship, and the down power person is still responsible for showing up with 100% of their power. The reason we highlight the level of responsibility is to really highlight the importance of personal power in both positions of the power differential. So what happens when folks are in a relationship and there are multiple different identities held by either folks at the same time? So for example, one of my supervisors at Naropa was a woman who identified as a Black woman. And so we had to navigate often the different power differentials within our relationship. So she had the up role power of being my supervisor. I had an up status power as being a white woman in that relationship. And how we navigate that was, first of all, having this language that we can be explicit about how power showed up in the room. But further, each one of us is responsible for tracking the impact that we have on the other that is specifically related to our up power position. Therefore, it is my responsibility to track how my whiteness might be impacting our relationship. It is her responsibility to track how her position as my supervisor is impacting our relationship. And so often we are in relationship with people where there are mixed up and down power identities. It's not fixed. But in this perspective, I ask you to track your impact that is related to your up power positions. And that is you showing up 150% responsible for those up power positions. So let's head on over to the next slide because we do have another discussion we want to get to. So let's revisit actually the restorative integration pyramid and where power consciousness fits in within the larger framework of restorative practices and restorative justice. So understanding our own positions of power helps us to better engage in relationship building, in communication and relationship maintenance, and also facilitation of repair for others and for conflicts within our own lives. I find that understanding power and its definition, the dimensions of power and power dynamics, as well as the roles and responsibilities that come along with power dynamics, are essential to showing up to restorative justice circles and to facilitating with eyes and heart wide open. Let's click over to the next slide. And this is the next slide is really just, again, a review that when we look at the far left side of the continuum, we see that there are more informal practices of restorative communities. And to the right side, we have more formal practices that happen in restorative communities. And we see justice circles on here as a more formal approach, but there are lots of other approaches to restorative practices within your community and where power and equity consciousness can come in as you engage in building communities of resilience and well-being. And so if you think back to the pyramid on the slide before and this continuum of restorative practices, we have a couple large group dialogue questions that I'm going to have Jenna kick off for us.
All right, so we're going to go back to the same format that we had where we have 3 people in a group or about that, and we're going to share in, around, and hold space and avoid crosstalk just like before. Manage our time with the awareness for how much or how little time you may be taking up with sharing, going back to the group agreements.
Oh, really quick, Jenna. There were a couple large group questions I wanted to ask really quick. Is that okay?
Is it these?
No, it is not. It's okay. It's in the notes section of slide 22. Okay. It's all good. At least things to think about because we are running short on time. I want us to think about how might power consciousness be important within restorative justice initiatives and processes. So yeah, I would even be open to a couple shares of why might being conscious about one's own power be important within restorative justice initiatives? Why do you think it could be important to know about power when it comes to RJ work?
And while we wait and people think about it, I can share a story. I was facilitating a restorative justice process about a month ago, I believe. And I'm a white person and my co-facilitator, I'm a cisgender white woman and my co-facilitator was a white man. And the person who we were doing the facilitation with, the person who had caused harm is a Black woman. And so being aware of identity there was very important. And I think that even how much space we took up as the facilitators there, and how we showed up and interacted with the person who caused harm, because we not only held status power, we held role power. And restorative justice is not about punishment and talking down to somebody, but that could easily happen with those two power positions. And so I think it was super important to be cognizant about the way that we talk to somebody who held power in multiple, who held less power in multiple ways. And it was an interesting way to navigate. It was interesting to try and navigate that and to try and co-facilitate that with somebody too, who didn't necessarily hold the same analysis.
That's great. And I will also mention it can show up a lot in creating agreements for repair. That power can show up a lot there, and that's where things can start to slip into punitive measures again, when agreements for repair start to reflect activities that have nothing to do with the harm that was caused. So there are lots of ways that power shows up in restorative justice circles. And for the essence of time, we'll move forward, but I would like for you to continue to think about, why is it important to foster power consciousness as someone interested in restorative justice initiatives? So we're going to move into a small connection circle again. You have already practiced these before, so you understand the framework. Let's go to the next slide, and there's just 2 rounds this time. And these are, what would you like your community and its members to know about power? And how might power consciousness fit into restorative justice initiatives within your community? These have gone into the chat box. Maria is going to put you back into groups, and you'll have 5 minutes this time, and we'll come back for a very brief debrief and closing.
Great. So please go ahead, and if you'd like to share any reflections, share anything that you've discussed in your group, please go ahead and type that into the chat. We have just a few minutes left, and we want to respect your time. So we're gonna exclusively stick with the chat and then do some closing stuff. But please stick with us through this closing stuff, because it's gonna be really good.
Thanks, Jenna. And thanks, folks, for really considering how power and equity consciousness is important within your communities and restorative justice initiatives. And again, it really can be the foundation of doing restorative initiatives within your communities. So as we go to this slide here, as we mentioned at the beginning of the call, today is part of a series. And so if we think back to that pyramid, we're kind of working our way up the pyramid. That first webinar was really kind of an overview of like, why a pyramid and not just a silo for restorative justice. And then we've now started to make our way up that pyramid by talking about the base of the importance of understanding our power as we then engage in restorative initiatives. So next time we'll talk about conflict transformation, and this builds upon power consciousness, helps us navigate conflict with a shared framework and language, and it will help us to better be able to practice restorative justice methods when we can view conflict from a different paradigm than the commonly used one, which is conflict avoidance. So the next slide, again, you can share in the chat or just things to consider, but we would love to hear from you if you have some burning responses. What are some takeaways from this webinar? What are you still curious about? And what unanswered questions might you have? And how might you go about getting answers to those questions? And Jenna, I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thank you. So we're going to, Maria, do you want to talk about the feedback form, the evaluation form for a minute before I dive into, or do you want to do it at the end?
Sure, I can do it now. Just really quickly, I've mentioned a couple of times in the chat box, I will be sending a follow-up email with the handouts, as well as a link to a survey that's very important for us, and has been used in this series to adjust, to pivot based on what it is you all are needing and your feedback. So that's really important to us, that you fill that out. You will be receiving that in a follow-up email, a link to that survey. So I'll turn it back over to you, Jenna.
Thank you. So here's the contact information for me and for Sarah. If you have anything for follow-up, if you want to know what my cat's name is, because she's so cute. She just decided to join us at the very end. Okay, so the last thing, we, CCASA, have been awarded a grant through the Colorado Restorative Justice Council of Colorado, which we are super, super excited about. The project allows us to work with 4 different communities. So we will select 4 different communities through an application process. And we will provide a structured type of opportunity to develop a restorative justice project specific to your community, which can look many different ways. So we're going to host a webinar on September 9th from 11 o'clock to 12 o'clock. So go ahead and block that out in your calendar. And the project is basically like how do we examine restorative justice for sexual violence within our community? How do we develop a project? And what we are really looking for is for you to build partnerships. So we will release the application for it. It's going to be a competitive application. And like I said, we'll select 4 different communities. That will be released on September 9th. And then the application for that will be due on October 8th. So if you're like, I really want to apply for this, the project entails being able to attend 1 meeting a month, an educational meeting, a work session, and then you also have the opportunity to work one-on-one with some consultants that we have. So we're requiring in our application that you have community partnerships, so that you have a CCASA member, and then you also have some community partnerships, and really focus on partnerships with groups and communities who are marginalized. Your partnerships could include folks like people who are doing restorative justice in your community already, whether that's a group or an individual. It could be a population-specific organization that works with LGBTQ folks, that works with immigrants, whatever it might be. But we are asking CCASA folks, CCASA members, to partner with at least 2 other folks in this application. So you could go ahead and get started and start talking to people about this. I sent out an announcement on the listserv already. So September 9th, save the date for the webinar to get more information about it. And then you'll have a month from there to fill out your applications and get them to us. And then it'll be a quick turnaround, and we'll let folks know who are selected by October 18th. And then a couple weeks later, we'll have the first session. So it is a quick turnaround, transparency around that. And we're really excited. So feel free to email me with any questions, and hope to see some of you at the informational webinar. And we will be hosting this meeting, this regular monthly meeting. I don't remember the date offhand, but it will be next month in September. And Lynn Lee is actually going to be facilitating that conversation. So that'll be exciting. So thank you so much, Sarah. So much appreciation to you sharing all your expertise, your knowledge, and to our interpreters here today, and for everyone who engaged. So happy to be in community with all of you, and look forward to connecting soon. Maria, do you have anything else for us?
Keep an eye out for future webinars. Join the Restorative Justice listserv if you haven't already. I'll be including that information in the follow-up email as well. Join our CCASA listserv as well, our e-digest and our newsletter and all of that fun stuff. Feel free to reach out to us at any point if you have any questions, and we look forward to seeing you all at a future event. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jenna. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, interpreters.
Sorry, Sarah, did you have anything else you wanted to say? I think I could go
Just
off.
thank you. I'm very excited to be here, and look forward to seeing some familiar faces next time.
Bye, everybody. Have a good one.